President-elect Donald Trump will take office on January 20th, 2025. On that day, of course, all the time he's running for president, it's supposed to be a joyous and a happy occasion and full of hope and optimism about what the future is going to be. But according to our next guest, he may be coming right into a big storm almost right from the beginning. The Trump and the storm of the century. The U.S. is sleepwalking into disaster in the Middle East. And that was written in the American Conservative by Colonel Doug Macgregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, highly decorated combat veteran and a friend of the show. Doug, welcome back.
Hi.
Always great to have you on here. And wow, let's just jump right into there. What is it that caused you to write this? Because those are a pretty strong headline there.
Yeah, I think the reason is very simple, that we have a tendency in this country to do things because we can, not because we need to or have to. Now remember, we don't necessarily have to intervene in other people's countries. There is no real requirement or compulsion for us to go to war with anybody. So if we're going to use military power, and that appears to be the case in the Middle East, then what are we going to do with it? What do we expect it to achieve? I think those are questions that need to be asked, because it may be that the instrumentalities at hand are not necessarily going to achieve what either Israel or the United States or both want to do.
And I want to go up and see if I can pull up a bit of this here. One of the things that I found interesting and kind of got my attention right off the bat was that you wrote, one thing is certain: if America joins Israel in its war against Iran, the outcome will be geopolitical showdown that could dramatically alter the world as we know it. It is the storm of the 21st century, and for the moment, the American ship of state is sailing right into it. Now, what do you consider the storm of the century? Because there's been a lot of things going on in the Middle East for quite a long time, and obviously this war against Hamas has been, about 14 months now going on. But you say something more serious is coming. What do you have in mind, or what are you worried about?
Well, first, even though it's probably a little trite at this point to mention it, we're in a situation that's not too different from 1914, when Austria decided to declare war on little Serbia. There was no expectation that Russia would ultimately commit its enormous power to this tiny state called Serbia. There was also no expectation in Berlin that the Austrians would really need any military assistance from Germany. Yet it turned out that Serbia put up a very effective fight. The Russians decided to join in. Then suddenly the French saw their opportunity to regain lost territory. And then, to make things worse, the British declared war and turned this minor Balkan dispute into not just a regional war, but a global war. So I think we have something similar in the Middle East right now. The Middle East is very different today from what it was since, let's say, 1973, when the Israelis fought both Syria and Egypt on two fronts. And that was a very dangerous war initially, because Israel's a small state and it has to move back and forth its forces to deal with two separate enemies. But we were able to assist Israel, and ultimately the Arab forces did not prove equal to the task they were assigned. With the exception of Egypt, the Egyptians shocked everyone with how well they performed and crossed the canal and seized territory. So, we just don't know where this will lead, but we can see the outlines right now of a war that could conceivably involve everyone. Right now, it's very clear that the Israelis want to do in the West Bank of Palestine what they've done in Gaza. And they've already done in southern Lebanon effectively what they've tried to do in Gaza. They want to drive the people that live in these areas out completely. So you have to bomb and destroy most of their living quarters, because if you don't do that, they may be tempted to come back. So it becomes a scorched earth policy all the way around. That has awakened the sleeping public, or the sleeping Arab street, if you will, on a scale that I don't think people in the West have any appreciation for. The Egyptians have already said, the Israelis want to drive all of these people ostensibly into Jordan. That's the nearest waypoint for the Palestinian Arabs. And that's Israel's view. So as they drive, if they kill or drive these people towards Jordan, that means war with Egypt. The Egyptians can't allow that to happen. The Jordanians are already overwhelmed, but they've got 11.2 million Palestinians living in Jordan. They're not going to sit quietly, and Abdullah may not be able to contain the explosion there. Finally, in Turkey, the Turks are looking at what's happening on their southern and eastern borders, where the Kurds are being stirred up by us, primarily the CIA and Mossad, with CENTCOM's support, about 100,000 Kurds to attack Turkey. The Turks are ready to declare war, go down there and clean them out. And at the same time, they've got enough forces they can turn on Lebanon and move into Lebanon, because they don't want this steady stream of millions of refugees from Lebanon moving into their country. And that puts them essentially at war with Israel. And we saw recently that the Egyptians and the Turks, their general staffs, met in Turkey. There's readiness now for cooperation between Egypt and Turkey, which in the past has been really impossible because of the Ottoman experience. So I think the Turks could be involved on the Egyptian front, helping the Egyptians against the Israelis, while at the same time closing in from their side. We haven't even mentioned Iran. And of course, attacking Iran and spreading this war, proliferating it, is going to make it all that much worse. And Syria, of course, is effectively a Russian protectorate. This brings Russia into the equation, because the Russians are not going to allow the Israelis to destroy Syria. The bottom line is everyone in the region is aligning against Israel. And Israel is also going to be up against Russia. And we know that China has said they will assist Iran in guaranteeing its sovereignty. Now, you can interpret that any way you want, but I think it's pretty clear that the Chinese will support the Iranians, and I think the Chinese will support the Peninsular Arabs who join this. And we don't normally think of them as having an impact because their militaries aren't that credible or large. But as we've talked before, Dan, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates could easily dump all their remaining U.S. treasuries and pull their wealth out of the United States banks.
Well, and speaking of Saudi Arabia, along all those things you just said, to what level of concern do you have that Saudi Arabia and Iran, which had been very embittered enemies for quite a long time, for many, many years, decades even, now all of a sudden they're having military cooperation and also diplomatic cooperation? Is that part of this storm?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. The Crown Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, made it abundantly clear that they consider Iran as a sisterly Islamic republic and that they're not prepared to stand by and watch it be destroyed. And they've warned Israel not to attack it. And by implication, that warning is to us. So I think we're facing a storm in the sense that all of these countries have military capabilities, some more than others, different kinds of capabilities. But they also have alternative sources of power, what we normally refer to as soft power. Only that soft power can be very damaging, particularly the financial end of it and the economic end of it. So the question is, what's going to happen to the next administration? How do they handle this? Do they simply step in and pick up where the Biden administration has left off and send us into a major war, which we're not prepared to fight, that will involve Russia and China, at least on a regional basis? And of course, remember, I wrote all of this before the announcement was made by President Biden that the Biden administration, along with its British and German and French allies, are going to release Scalpel and Storm Shadow cruise missiles and ATACMS to the Ukrainians. And this is not going to help the situation in the Middle East. You know, what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. If you're a Russian, you're looking at a threatening situation to Russia and Russian interests in both Europe and the Middle East.
And, and then that gets us back into the situation here about what the incoming administration is going to be. And there have been a number of, and this is, I think you sometimes refer to it as a uniparty. We see lots of, certainly the current administration just gives absolute deference to Israel and whatever they want to do. But there's a number of folks that are otherwise on the right and the conservative side that have also been voicing a lot of comments about how they're going to support whatever Netanyahu wants to do. And that brings me back to your article here. I wanted to highlight something else here because you said something I think is absolutely vital that needs to happen in the Nixon administration, which definitely is not in this current administration. And that is to answer some vital, critical questions. What is the American purpose in waging war against Iran? Should we get drawn into one? Is Washington's purpose to destroy the Iranian state, to destroy its capability to wage war against Israel, to eliminate Iran's development of nuclear capacity, or to decapitate the Iranian state in the hope the Iranian people will overthrow their national government? And I think that last part is at least a theoretical hope to some. But do you see anybody even asking these questions? Because so far, all I've seen is the emotion of we hate Iran.
No, I think that's right. And if you go back to Naftali's comments on the head of the octopus, if you want to kill the octopus, which has its arms all over the region that are threatening to Israel, then you have to kill the octopus, chop the head off, destroy the head. I think from the Israeli standpoint, they just want to see as much damage done to Iran as possible, on the assumption that that will somehow or another prevent or deter any development of a nuclear weapon, when in fact I think the opposite is true. Anyone who looks at what's been happening in the region and what the Israelis have done, what we have done in Iraq and Syria, Libya later on, and now in Yemen, everyone will want a nuclear weapon as a means of deterring us. So our hostility to everyone, along with Israel's hostility to everyone, is actually the catalyst for the nuclear weaponization of the region. But nobody wants to say that in the United States. It's all that we're back to this chicken and egg thing. Well, they started this, or they're evil and they're bad and we're really good, and therefore whatever they do is wrong and whatever we do is good. It's ridiculous nonsense. We all know that this goes back to 1947 and 48. The issue right now is, what can we actually do? Can we decapitate the Iranian regime? I don't think so. But there are a lot of people in the Air Force who think it's eminently possible. But then the Air Force thinks usually on any given day that it can do everything. And it very rarely performs to expectation. In fact, I don't think it ever does, because it's part of a larger effort as opposed to a single approach. So I don't know what the real purpose is other than destroy Iran. And this is a nation of 100 million people. You know, are we kidding? Are we crazy? I mean, this is absurd. I don't see how this accomplishes anything. And then the question, of course, is, just as we faced after World War II, we did everything in our power to utterly destroy Germany and Japan. Then someone woke up and realized, what have we done? Now there is no one to oppose the Soviet giant that has emerged from this war. No one is there to oppose communism in Asia. I think it's another situation where if we go in there and actually destroy this country, we're going to be in the same position. Who else benefits from this? Who fills the vacuum? We're not very clever when we think about these things. As you say, too much is emotion.
And then I guess the policy question for the incoming administration is, what is the end state? You talk about this all the time, and it almost never gets talked about in the national discussion, in the discourse. What do you want to accomplish? What does America think the Middle East ought to look like that would be in our security interest? And I would wager, and I would like your view on it, that it's the absence of war, not militarily trying to defeat something that, as you point out, of a nation of 100 million, probably couldn't be done in any kind of a time frame or expense that would make it worth it to us.
I think since 1991, the unspoken truth, Dan, is that we're trying to make the Middle East and much of the world safe for Israel. And that's a tall order. Israel has to be part of that equation. We can't force everyone to love Israel. We cannot kill everyone who doesn't love Israel. This is the problem that has always confronted us. The Israelis have to play a role in this. Now, after 73, they did. They reached an accommodation with Egypt. I think that accommodation is now being destroyed, but I think that was very successful and very positive. Israel has been unwilling to negotiate and compromise on any range of issues on the grounds that any compromise at all puts the survival of Israel at risk. Well, I would argue now that the absence of any willingness to compromise or to negotiate is actually the path to extinction for the Israeli state. And I think they're on that path right now because we cannot kill everyone in the region that refuses to love Israel. Let's put it that bluntly. And we're not here to do that. I don't think we should be there to do it. So I think that's the unspoken truth. I don't think military power is necessarily the right instrument for that purpose.
And when you talk about what the Israeli side is doing, now I'm going to play a clip here from the UN General Assembly speech that Netanyahu gave in September, and it seems to me that he's setting up a political objective that I'm not sure that militarily can be accomplished.
This war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it.
And so he's got a total victory. I mean, you see, they've been there, 14 months and counting just in the Gaza Strip alone. And that war continues to rumble on it. And of course, they've started a whole new northern front in the southern Lebanon, which I don't even know what their military objectives are, much less how attainable they are. And they continue to suffer casualties in both of those while they're still talking about taking on Iran. How do you see this in military terms?
Well, two things. It's reminiscent of Serbia. Serbia was threatened in essentially the same way by the Austrians when it was not necessary by any means to do so. And what occurred? Today, Austria-Hungary is gone. And Austria-Hungary collapsed in 1919. And Serbia expanded into this thing we called Yugoslavia for 50 years or whatever number of years it was. I think you have a similar situation right now. This is not going to work militarily. We can't possibly achieve all of his aims that he would like to achieve because he's saying unconditional surrender. This was the remark that was given by FDR without consulting anybody off the top of his head at the conference in Casablanca in 1943. Even Stalin at that point said, "My God, why are you doing this? This is going to lengthen the war." And everybody else privately thought that way as well, but the British didn't have much choice in the matter since they were at best a junior partner in the enterprise and were entirely dependent upon us at that point for everything. So they went along with it. But it undoubtedly lengthened the war. Had we taken a more reasonable approach, I don't think the war would have lasted for the last 12 months. I think it could have ended probably before Christmas of 1944. The same thing is true with the Japanese, offering them the opportunity to either surrender and embarrass themselves and defame themselves and their whole population or fight to the death. And they obviously chose to, practically speaking, to fight to the death. This is a dumb idea. It's not going to work. Again, there has to be some give and take on some side. And what he is saying, and which is very popular right now inside Israel and with most Americans, is everyone else is evil. We are good. Therefore, what we demand must be supported. If you don't support us, if you don't give us what we want, then you all deserve to die. I don't think that works.
It certainly doesn't. And when we circling back, because we're always supposed to be primarily concerned with American interest, this was being reported by Fox News just yesterday. That Netanyahu says he ignored Biden's war council. And that's yeah, no kidding. That's not what a shock that is. But the question is, what about the incoming Trump administration? Now, we know that certainly Trump has been very vocal about being pro-Israel and apparently has a good relationship with Netanyahu. But do you think that Trump will prioritize American national interest and economic interest and security interest over that of Netanyahu if it push comes to shove? And will Netanyahu ignore Trump?
Unless the United States itself is threatened, which is a distinct possibility in the future. And when I say threatened, I mean threatened by a direct attack, either missiles or other kinds of weapons. I suspect that we'll do whatever Netanyahu says. Now, there's also another possibility. And we're very dependent right now in providing air and missile power. In other words, we're primarily a maritime state and an aerospace state. We are only a land power in North America, as you and I know. Maintaining large armies on the Eurasian landmass or in Africa is extraordinarily expensive and dangerous, particularly given the weapons right now. So we're really dependent on air and missile power. Do we have enough missiles aboard ship? Can we transport enough missiles and bombs and other things by air into the region to beat everyone into submission? I think the Biden administration has said yes. I think Mr. Netanyahu fervently believes that can be done. And I think you're going to find, certainly with the key players like Secretary of Defense Hegseth, Secretary of State Rubio, the National Security Advisor Waltz, they are all going to line up 100% with the notion that we can focus our attention on Iran, we can level it, we can destroy it, and beat everyone else in the region into submission. I've tried to point out in this article that that's not going to happen, that Iran is a much tougher nut to crack than apparently people think. And then secondly, that all of the countries in the region are coalescing into a formidable force that together can prevail. And they are being backed today by two extraordinarily powerful states who are no longer afraid of us. And it's interesting. I hear people say all the time, well, you know, that's the problem. If President Trump were still here, they'd all be afraid. Well, I'm not sure that's true anymore, because the kinds of weapons that we have, our capabilities are no longer unique to us. The capabilities that you and I saw in action are now everywhere. Even small nations can be extraordinarily lethal and dangerous in ways that was never the case in the past. So I don't think it's simply a case of people being afraid of us. I think it's time to look at other incentives. And, you know, the bribing and bullying has exhausted itself. So there has to be some give on our side, and that means with Israel. I don't see any of that happening. So that means, are we going to wait until we sustain heavy casualties? We have roughly 23,000 soldiers on the ground in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Do we wait until they're killed? They could easily be killed. And then we say, what? Now we want to declare war on everyone in order to rescue our ruined reputation? I'm not sure that could be done. Again, what are we? Are we a reactionary state like Austria-Hungary? You know, desperately reaching out to hold on to what we think is our imperial power, instead of looking rationally at the world, recognizing that it has changed, and we need to adapt to that new world in order to do business with the rest of the world, which is really what most of the world wants to do with us.
Yeah, and I certainly hope that the incoming administration recognizes that. I know there are some good picks in there, and there are some good people that are being staffed in that can move in that direction, and I certainly advocate that with all the energy that I have.
Well, you know, Dan, if I could just interrupt, I mean, some of these nominees, once they are in the positions that they've been assigned, they may see the world a little differently from what they expected. And that may result in some change.
Let's certainly hope it does. Once they get in there and they start finding out, I guess a lot of the compounding issues that can certainly focus people in a way that it doesn't when you're just given 30-second sound bites on TV. Let's hope.